Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last broadcast hour of the week, with usually, and certainly this week, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of our prior Hillsdale Dialogues are collected at hugh4hillsdale.com. You can also find them by going directly to the college's website at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Arnn, we are deep into Volume 1 of Winston Churchill's Second World War series, and today we're going to cover the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 39, and the abdication crisis. That's Chapter 12, The Loaded Pause, for those who are following along with their own copies. But before we do that, I didn't want to dance on by the fact that Republicans got thumped on Tuesday night, and Dr. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation gave a fine speech at Hillsdale a couple of nights earlier. Let's do Dr. Roberts first. I think his speech was much better than his video, and I think it was well received from what I could see. How did the students like it?
They liked it fine. You know, we're not 24 hours wrapped up in public affairs around here, so some of them knew about the mess. The mess comes from Tucker Carlson did an interview with a really crazy guy named Nick Fuentes, and he got a lot of flack for that. My own view about that interview is Nick Fuentes is an open admirer of Stalin and Hitler, so if you're going to interview the guy, you should read to him from the Gulag Archipelago about Stalin and from Man's Search for Meaning, it's an Auschwitz diary, about Hitler. And then you should ask him, is that what you're for? Because apparently Tucker didn't do that. Anyway, Kevin didn't want Tucker King.
And we should all agree, you and I, and everyone that I know at Hillsdale, think Stalin and Hitler are in a very brisk competition with Mao for worst people of the 20th century.
Yep, that's it. And you know, these guys are hideous, right? And apparently, you know, this Nick Fuentes got a big following, and apparently a lot of them's young men. And the reason to talk to the guys, because you can talk to anybody, but you should be trying to teach those young men something better. And if that's what his audience is. And so there's nothing wrong with talking with him, but you ought to fight him. So anyway, and Kevin is a man of good principle and opinion and good character, and everything will be fine. But there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in America right now. And
there are, and
Nick
I was wondering, what did Churchill do with the fascist in the United Kingdom, Lord Oswald, whatever his last name was? Did he engage with him, or did he shun him?
He engaged with him. Oswald was a man of some prominence, had some government experience, and Churchill arrested some of those guys when the war broke out.
Right.
Oswald was confined to quarters, but yeah, there's a system called Rule 14B, I think it was called, and they could arrest people for subverting the war effort. And in 1943, after the Battle of Alamein, when the war began to ease, Churchill immediately called for the suspension of that thing. He was the first to do it. And he got a lot of resistance in the House of Commons. They got it done. But a funny story, Martin Gilbert, Sir Martin Gilbert, the Churchill biographer, a Jew, ended up riding on a train with Oswald Mosley.
Oh.
In much later life. Yeah, and found him a very pleasant man. But he was a kook, and he was a Nazi. And, you know, Nazi's not a good thing to be.
We will get more into what Churchill thought of Nazis before he came to power today and next week. But let me quickly also get you to comment on the thumping in New Jersey and Virginia, which are blue states, and Manhattan and the four boroughs besides, which is deep blue. I'm not panicking. I'm not alarmed. I would have liked to have won New Jersey. I had my hopes up a little bit because Chitterelli is a very, very fine man and good candidate, but I'm not surprised the thumping took place. Are you?
No. I mean, the country is dividing. Both the blue states have been redistricting themselves in favor of their party for a long time, and the Republicans are doing it now too. And the effect of this is going to be that they're going to be more divided from each other, and the country's splitting up in political inclination. And the blue states are, seem to be confirmed in their blueness, and at least for now. And it's too bad. One had hopes. I think that Winsome Sears lady who got beat running in Virginia is an inspiring story and a good woman. I'd love to see her win. You wrote to me that it makes Youngkin look really great. Youngkin is a really great politician. I bet he's got a future of some kind. I hope so.
Yeah. I did want to point out that Byron New York came up with the one statistic that I thought most interesting. In the city of New York, those with no high school degree voted 49 to 40% Cuomo over Mondami. Those with just a high school degree voted 47 to 39% for Cuomo over Mondami. Those who had some college preferred Cuomo 48 to 40%. Those with an associate's degree preferred Cuomo 48 to 45%. But those with bachelor's and especially advanced degrees preferred Cuomo to Mamdani by 57 to 37%. So Mamdani won with the so-called educated elite. I am shocked.
Yeah, that's just, I didn't know it was that dramatic. Also, I didn't know there were that many of them in New York. It makes me fear for the Republic.
They're also in D.C. in large numbers. That's why Virginia went blue.
Yeah. Well, these driving Ubers in D.C. and that's kind of good for them actually, because I have met several who are like that, and they sort of have a very strong sense of reality. So, but in New York, apparently not. Here's an interesting thing. For a long time, if you lived up in New York or Massachusetts and you moved down to Florida, you went because the weather was better. And that made Florida bluer. But that doesn't seem to be the reason anymore. Now they're going because they can't bear them. It's
1% of New York City, 1% pays 48% of the income taxes. And that 1% is going to get smaller in a hurry. Let me go to the reading ahead. On page 186 to 90, Churchill summarizes Great Britain's historical position. For 400 years, he writes, the foreign policy of England had been imposed to the strongest, most aggressive, most dominating power on the continent, and particularly the Low Countries falling into the hands of such a power. And he brings up the Armada and Philip II, Louis XIV versus his wonderful ancestor Marlborough and William II, opposing Napoleon and opposing the Kaiser. And he says, we should do it again. He just marched into the Rhineland, but people were starting to pay attention when the abdication came along.
So first of all, that foreign policy, I was just talking to a very interesting man named Chris Ford, who's doing a study for the Defense Department. He's very smart. He's a professor in Missouri. And he was asking me to speculate about future China, future America, what they'll be like and what their relations will be. And I told him I didn't know anything about the future, but I knew something about the past. And I read him this statement that Churchill made to a bunch of the conservative members of the Parliament about the nature of British foreign policy, and it's a fair description of the nature of our foreign policy. I just think the purpose of the government of the United States is the protection of the rights of its people. Then foreign policy is a tool for that, and it should be run with that directly in mind as much as possible. And if you go try to settle the whole world and dominate the whole world, you'll spend endless money and never get it done. If you look for some efficient friends who will be durable and can contribute and are located in places that matter, then you might be able to run your foreign policy more successfully and cheaply. And things like that are going to become more important to us because China's got a bigger navy than we have and is involved in the greatest military buildup in human history. as the Germans were in these very years that we're talking about. And the adjusted for inflation, the Chinese one is bigger than what the Germans did. So, yeah, we've got to think about how to do it efficiently and, not do more of it than we have to do, because the real purpose is so people can be happy at home, make a living, and live their lives and raise their families. And I think sometimes we've been guilty of forgetting that.
And that is indeed the case. We have been guilty of forgetting that. Don't go anywhere except to hillsdale.edu. Hugh for hillsdale.com. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn after this.
Hello, this is Jeremiah Regan, and I have some great news. We've brought Hillsdale's incredibly popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. The Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast brings you our online courses in their entirety, with courses ranging from ancient history and biblical epics to foundational political principles and the future of American citizenship. Follow the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Hillsdale Dialogue underway. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All the dialogues at hughforhillsdale.com. Dr. Arnn, we went to break. You were talking about the ultimate purposes of the government, so that national security is a servant of the population that you are securing.
Yeah, and that's only because everything is, and that is a fact included in the category everything.
Yeah.
The government of the United States has a reason for being, and it's stated in its founding document, and it should do that. It should pursue that reason. That's what it's for.
All right. Now, let me turn then to something that I have never quite studied at length, which is the Spanish Civil War, which runs from 1936 to 1939. And I think I have 4 quick maps that Harley might be able to throw up there if he got the pictures. It shows that there are 2 parties. There's 1936. The pink is Franco's people, though he hasn't consolidated. Then move along, Harley, to 1937, then 1938, and then 1939. And guess what? Franco wins. The Brits don't get involved in this, Dr. Arnn. Why not? And why, by the way, does France stand aside when Stalin is helping the communists, or they called themselves Republicans, but they're communists, and Hitler is helping Franco and the Phalange? Why does Britain stand off from that?
Britain stood off from it because it was, well, for a good reason and a bad reason. The bad reason was it was generally standoffish at a time when it didn't need to be. Churchill stood off from it. He writes in this book, in this chapter, that he was neutral. And the reason was we're up to our ears in alligators. At this time, the Soviet Union and the communists are on one side, and Hitler and the fascists are on the other side. And he didn't. And if you choose one of the sides, you're certainly not going to choose Hitler's side. And see, Franco, I have to zoom ahead a little bit. Franco was not really a Nazi. And as the war unfolded after he won this war, it becomes a terrible frustration to Hitler that Franco remained neutral and didn't help him. And Hitler expected that he would. And that was a great boon to the Western Allies. In the first 3 years of the war, a lot of it is fought in North Africa, and British ships going from Britain had to go past Spain to get down there. And if Spain had been hostile, and also hostile in the Mediterranean where it has access, that would have been dangerous and bad. So it actually worked out for the West, the anti-Hitler forces, that Franco won. And but at the time, it was a confused and confusing thing, and you never know how it's going to play out. And, at the time, Hitler was the obvious enemy, and the Soviet Union, in Churchill's mind, was a thing, in most British minds, by the way, was a thing to be hated, feared and hated. So they want to join them. And the Soviets are all over that thing, trying to get a communist. That, by the way, George Orwell fought in that war down there and turned against communism. He was on the communist side, and he turned against it because he was in prison for a time, and they kept taking people from cells nearby him and torturing them or shooting them. And he watched that, and he just thought, this is terrible, right? But so you didn't want to join them. Now, they end up being our allies in the Second World War, having been the allies of the Germans first, because they're fighting it out through proxy in Spain. But what is this? A year and a half later, they join with Hitler to carve up Poland. So the reasons that it was hard to figure out was that diplomacy is a very shifty thing, especially on the eve of that big war.
When we finished the Hillsdale cruise together, and you went off and did smart things, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I took in a play called Operation Mincemeat. True story. The ruse to persuade Hitler that the Allies were going to land in Corsica or Sardinia and not Sicily. And it worked. They used a dead body and they floated it up with false documents in Spain, where pretty much every spy worth his or her salt was for at least a period of the war. So it became the intrigue capital of the World War. Everyone had a spy in Spain.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the abdication crisis, and it's useful to say something about that because the King of England was Edward VIII, and he abdicated because he had a relationship going where he eventually married her to an American named Wallis Simpson, who was a divorced woman.
We have a picture of them. Harley, put up if you've got the picture ready so that people can see. They're quite the dashing couple in, what is this, 1936, Dr. Arnn?
Yeah, that's right.
And so she is a divorcee, right?
That's it. And he's the head of the Church of England back at a time when that mattered more than us today. And so Churchill was, Churchill knew all of the monarchs and all the princes royal and princesses royal and most of the aristocracy all his life. And he knew Edward VIII since growing up. And when there's a crisis like that, then the prime minister is the advisor and in some ways the controller of what the monarchy does. Edward asked Stanley Baldwin, who was very clever, if he could consult with Churchill. Now, my opinion about all this, because Churchill just got completely outmaneuvered and made, in my opinion, gross mistakes here. And the heart of the mistake was he trusted Edward. Edward turned out to be, this is what reminded me of it, Spain. He spent some time in Spain and then quite a lot in France. He turned out to be a Nazi sympathizer later. And in the middle of his great campaign, which ultimately succeeded, barely, to get Britain to start arming itself and get ready to fight, because if you don't get ready to fight, you're going to have to fight, and then you'll lose. Churchill stood up for Edward, and it was all cooked by the time he did that. He gave a speech, and he records in this book that he could hardly be heard, but it was a complete failure because everybody in the place except Churchill knew better and knew what was going on better than Churchill did. He was only talking to Edward.
More coming up on that in a moment. America, don't go anywhere. Edward VIII, not a good guy. We'll find out how he brought Churchill down to a very low point just when the war might have been averted if Churchill had been able to have more strength at the time of the abdication crisis. We'll talk more about that. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. And all of our dialogues on the World War II memoirs already recorded are found at hughforhillsdale.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. We are talking on the Hillsdale Dialogue with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, about the abdication crisis and Edward VIII. And it doesn't end then, right, Dr. Arnn?
Churchill would later have a lot of relations with Edward all the way to the time of Churchill's death. But in 1941, I think that's the year, Churchill got a letter from Edward's brother, now King George VI. He's the man that they made the movie, The King's Speech about.
Yep. He stuttered.
He's the father of Elizabeth II, and he's a great guy, but he never wanted to be king. Anyway, George VI writes to Churchill and says, my brother says he's coming back to England from occupied France, where he was hanging out, and Portugal and Spain, having coffee with German agents, diplomats mostly. And he says he's going to make a series of speeches. Oh my gosh. And Churchill writes him a letter, which is published in the Churchill biography. It says, after he's abdicated, Edward VIII becomes the Duke of Windsor. That was his title for the rest of his life. Churchill writes, my dear Windsor, I write to remind you that you are a field marshal in the British Army and that you are subject to all the rules of courts-martial. You have been appointed Governor General of the Bahamas and have not reported to your post.
Huh.
There will be a British warship waiting for you tomorrow at the port in the town where you are. You will be on it. Winston Churchill.
That's actually right. Can we back up 1 second? Because I've never understood the abdication crisis. I understood that Winston Churchill misjudged the feeling of the House, but why was everyone... I know that the Church of England didn't like divorce, but Henry VIII made the rules when he couldn't get divorced. I thought the rules had changed to allow for divorce by that time. What was it that she was an American, that she was twice divorced? Because they remained married their whole life. They were deeply in love. Well,
it's in the difference between the time of Henry VIII and the time of Edward VIII is that Henry VIII was a very powerful man, and Edward VIII is a symbol. And what they have to be is a family. And, they are the royal family. And so back then they needed to act like a family. And so this was unacceptable to British opinion that a twice divorced American would marry and be the queen. At one point, Stanley Baldwin explored trying to fashion a morganatic marriage, they called it, and I can't remember.
You've left the Steelers fans behind right there. They're going to think Morgantown in West Virginia. What is a morganatic marriage?
That's when a Steelers fan marries a Buckeye.
Well done. Well played, Mr. Bond.
Neither one of them can read. What it means, I don't know where the name comes from. What it means is she would be married to the king, but she would not be the queen. And Edward dug in his heels about that, as I recall. And so the thing fell apart and he abdicated. And my point that I want to make is he was not a good guy, right? Later, he and Churchill had cordial relations. When Elizabeth II, the great queen who died a few years ago, was coronated in 1952, Churchill was prime minister, and he arbitrated between members of the family and the Duke of Windsor so he could come back for the deal. And Churchill treated him very cordially, having previously threatened to have him arrested. And so their job was to be a family now. And, if they reign but don't rule, then they are a symbol. And they're not an unimportant symbol. They're a very important symbol. I mean, this stuff with Prince Andrew that's going on lately is grievous to
Andrew of Windsor, by the way. Now Andrew of Windsor, no longer Prince Andrew.
Andrew of Windsor, yeah. He doesn't have a title anymore. And he hadn't behaved himself very well. And so, that hurts, right? And the stuff with Charles and Diana, that hurts, right? That compromises their ability to perform, to do their job, to be the symbol of British sovereignty.
To do their duty, in essence. Don't go anywhere, America. We'll continue with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All the dialogues prior and future at hughforhillsdale.com. Stay tuned.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding. And we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogues underway. Last broadcast hour of the week. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. We're talking about the traditions of Great Britain, a great parliamentary democracy, some of which endure.
Now, I will tell you that there are still forms that exist that change things in Britain. And the two most important ones of which I know are the Prime Minister has to consult with the Queen on a regular basis. Goes over and sees her, and the King now tells him what's going on. The King has to sign the bills to make them law. When a minister is to take a position appointed by the Parliament and in the government, a senior minister, he has to go to the palace and do what's called kiss hands. That means you report, talk to the King for a minute, and he says, and you kiss his hands, and now you can do it. He appoints you. Finally, the parliamentary season begins in the August, I think, or September, after being off in the summer. And when they get back together, it begins with the speech from the throne. And in the speech from the throne, this happens in the chamber of the House of Lords. And the forms of it are hallowed and important and developed through hard history. The Queen, the monarch, comes in through a gate on the House of Lords side and enters into a throne room that's behind the chamber, it's big, of the House of Lords, and puts on all the gear. And then when it's getting close to time, agents of the House of Lords go down and walk a long hallway to the other end of the Palace of Westminster. The part that's directly under Big Ben is the House of Commons. And they knock on the door with a staff. They don't open the door themselves. And the place where they knock on the door with the staff has now got a big depression in it because they've been doing it for 200, 300 years now, 400 years now. And that traces back to Charles I invading the House of Commons with troops to arrest Oliver Cromwell and others. He didn't get them all. He didn't get any of them, actually. They'd all flown away. They knew he was coming. But, he eventually got his head cut off. And now no agent of the monarch or the aristocracy can enter the chamber of the House of Commons without permission from the House of Commons.
You may be surprised, Dr. Arnn. The book I have most recently read is called A Call at 4 a.m. by Amit Segal, probably Israel's most influential analyst and television journalist. And he's writing about the 14 prime ministers of Israel and their biggest decisions. But on page 2 of his book, he talks about this tradition. He said, this is what stability looks like. What about tradition? And then he recites, he said, the Queen's representative taps on it 3 times with a black rod topped with a miniature lion. Since 1642, the same black rod has struck the same door every year in the name of the same crown. If you ever ask Siri, what's tradition? Your iPhone might give you a picture of this dent on the door caused by 1,134 knocks, 3 a year. That's in a book published this year by an Israeli journalist about why Israel's political system is shambles. Isn't that remarkable?
Isn't that great? And see, I just love that. And then the members
too.
of the House of Commons go down that long hallway and assemble with the members of the House of Lords. And the Queen comes out from behind from her, or the King, from the throne room and sits on a throne in front of the House of Lords and reads the government program for the year. And the Prime Minister and the Cabinet write that program. He or she doesn't, the monarch doesn't write it, but they read it. And I once told Martin Gilbert, because I was very taken with these facts, I still am. Now you are too, Hugh.
Yes.
And that puts some limit on what they might do, I said to Martin Gilbert. And he looked at me and he said, they can still get a little crazy, can't they? So but those forms persist, right? And they're taken seriously. And like the abolition of the monarchy in Britain would be devastating to Britain. And it's not impossible it will.
It's Segal's opinion that Israel needs more tradition because they are untethered to any particular constitution, written or unwritten, and they make their way. Yeah. I want to quickly, before this wraps up, get to the fact that Churchill was very aware of the fact, quote, my influence had fallen to zero. It takes a certain statesman-like quality to be able to assess yourself that candidly, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and he what I think is it would be a much worse thing if Winston Churchill had betrayed a friend who was a good man than standing by somebody he thought was a friend that was a bad man. And that's the kind of mistake that Churchill might make. Stanley Baldwin not quite so likely to make such a mistake. And it did cost a lot. And this is right in the, so in, if we get the years right, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933. He takes the Rhineland and begins to fortify it in 1935. Churchill thinks 1935 was a big year because that was a treaty violation. And France by itself could have stopped it with a small part of its army. And Britain refused to help them. They didn't really need British help. But they let him get away with it, right? So 1935 is a big year because that's when it passes the easy opportunity to stop this.
It's hard to believe there was an easy opportunity to stop the war, but Dr. Arnn is right. We'll come back and discuss more of that. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. If you just tuned in, you knew that because of the music. We reserve the opening sequence for the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last broadcast hour of every week. All of them are collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Everything Hillsdale, including, the application you might want to fill out if you're 17 or 18 or 19 years old right now, or if you're a parent, you want to interest your kid in a wonderful, terrific education at Hillsdale. It's all at hillsdale.edu, as are all of their free online courses. You can also sign up for Imprimis, the monthly speech digest, which arrives the old-fashioned way in your mailbox, absolutely free. And if you want to support Hillsdale, the donate button is there. They are, I think, what's going to keep the country together long-term, our Hillsdale graduates. Talking with Dr. Larry Arnn about Volume 1, The Gathering Storm. And indeed, Dr. Arnn, we're getting to the point where Hitler could have been stopped.
In Germany, very powerful forces thought Hitler is reckless and he shouldn't do this. And if he had a setback, he might have been taken out. And he would have had to be more, anyway, Germany would have had to be more cautious. But they let him get away with it, and now his prestige grows. And then darned if he doesn't up and take over Austria, and then Czechoslovakia, and then Poland. We'll get to all that. And the point is, when it was easy to do something, they didn't. And eventually we got the greatest war in history. And this abdication thing comes up at a moment when Churchill is getting traction, and Stanley Baldwin just completely outmaneuvered him. And Baldwin probably was not even maneuvering, but Baldwin was trying to do the right thing. He tried to save the situation with Edward. He tried to work out a compromise. And Edward was not a good fellow. He just was not a good fellow.
And I will put a period on this edition of the Hillsdale Dialogues by pointing out to the revisionists out there who are trying to tear down Churchill. Churchill was trying to stop Hitler until the abdication, and he continued to stop Hitler and eventually had to stop Hitler as head of England. But he is utterly powerless after this crisis in 1936. He has got zero influence at the moment when he's most needed. And so the people who want to blame World War II on Churchill, they don't know anything. Can I get a amen from you, Dr. Arnn?
Amen. And we should start with that point next time, because we should describe what Churchill did to rebuild himself and get a rearmament campaign underway.
Deal. And we will be back again next week, and we will pick up there with that amen and what Churchill did to rebuild himself and how crucial it was, and how he made partnership with the most unlikely of people, Anthony Eden. Maybe not that unlikely, but I can't think of anyone with an upbringing or a background more different. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thank you, Adam. And, of course, thank you, Dr. Arnn. Everything Hillsdale can be found at hillsdale.edu. All of our prior dialogues, including the 10 or so about these memoirs, can be found at hughforhillsdale.com or over at hillsdale.edu. Thank you for listening. Talk to you on Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.